J.D. Vance was no ordinary politician. The 50th Vice President of the United States, Vance had always been a man of resilience and intellect, rising from the small-town struggles of Appalachia to become one of the most prominent figures in American politics. His journey had been anything but conventional. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Rather, he had fought tooth and nail to build his reputation, armed with his sharp mind and an unwavering commitment to the American people. Vance's memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, had been a nationwide bestseller, bringing his personal story to the forefront of national debates. It offered a searing look at the struggles of working-class Americans, touching on themes of poverty, family dynamics, and the fractured American dream. The book propelled him to national fame, not just as an author, but as a thought leader capable of offering solutions to America's most pressing issues. By the time he became vice president, Vance had already proven himself to be a figure of substance. He was well respected for his intellect, his ability to cut through political rhetoric, and his deep empathy for the struggles of ordinary Americans. Yet, despite his rise to the second most powerful position in the country, his demeanor remained grounded and humble. He was a man who hadn't forgotten where he came from, and it was this connection to the people that made him beloved by millions. On that evening, as he arrived at the gates of the exclusive Washington, D.C. gala, the atmosphere was electric. The air was thick with excitement, as the nation's most powerful individuals gathered for a night of lavish networking. The venue was one of the most prestigious in the city, a symbol of the political elite and business moguls who ruled the corridors of power. It was an event where connections were made, deals were struck, and the country's future was subtly shaped in the hands of its most influential figures. Vance had been invited to attend as a distinguished guest, and his presence was meant to symbolize the bridge between the American people and the political establishment. As he approached the entrance, he was greeted by the sight of sharply dressed men and women moving with purpose, their laughter and chatter filling the air as they made their way inside. Everything about the night screamed luxury and power. But what Vance had not expected was the scene that awaited him at the entrance. The doorman, an older man with graying hair and a clipboard in hand, glanced at Vance, his expression betraying no recognition. A slight frown creased the man's forehead as he looked down at the list before him. The doorman seemed to hesitate for a moment, before looking back up, his gaze piercing. He studied Vance for a moment longer, as if trying to place him, but then spoke, his tone firm yet polite. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not on the list." The words hit like a shock-wave. Vance's face, typically composed and calm in the face of adversity, flickered for a split second. He stood frozen, momentarily caught off guard. How could this be? He was the Vice President of the United States. This event was one that he had been personally invited to, and yet here he was, being told he wasn't welcome. The irony of it all wasn't lost on him. He had fought for years to break through barriers, to make a difference, to earn the respect of those who had once dismissed him. And now, standing at the door of one of the most exclusive events in the country, he was being denied entry. The doorman repeated, "I'm sorry, sir. You'll need to speak to the event coordinator." Vance blinked, his mind quickly processing the situation. He had faced his share of challenges before, but this felt different. This wasn't a political opponent trying to undercut him, nor was it a journalist looking for a headline. This was something more personal, an affront to his very identity. But Vance, a man known for his steely resolve, refused to let his composure slip. He knew that how he handled this moment would speak volumes about his character. With a calm that only years in politics could afford him, Vance met the doorman's gaze and spoke, his voice low and steady. "There seems to be some mistake. I am J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. I was invited to this event." The doorman looked at him once more, his brow furrowing as he scanned the list again. The tension between the two men was palpable, But Vance did not break. He stood firm, not in anger, but in quiet confidence. "I'm sorry, sir," the doorman said again. "I don't see your name on the list. I can't let you in without confirmation." Vance felt the sting of this denial, but instead of responding with anger or frustration, he simply nodded. This was not a moment to escalate. He had faced far worse in his career, and he would not let this minor setback define him. But something inside him told him that this moment, no matter how small, was significant. This was not just about gaining entry to a gala, it was about standing up for himself in the face of unwarranted rejection. As he stood there, waiting for the event coordinator, a part of him wondered why this had happened. Was it an honest mistake, or was it something more deliberate? He knew this world well. He had spent years navigating its backdoor deals, its covert alliances, its ever-changing dynamics. Nothing was ever purely random. The event coordinator soon arrived, a well-dressed woman in her mid-30s, who immediately seemed to recognize the situation. Her expression was one of slight embarrassment, though she tried to maintain a professional demeanor. She glanced at Vance, then at the doorman, before addressing the situation. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Vance," she said with a slight stammer. "There seems to have been an issue with the list. Please, come right in. We've been expecting you." J.D. Vance entered the gala, but the sting of the rejection still lingered in his mind. He could feel the weight of the moment, the awkwardness of being denied entry in front of so many influential people. But he was no stranger to adversity. Throughout his life, he had encountered plenty of moments where he had to rise above challenges, and this would be no different. Still, something about the situation nagged at him. Was it truly an honest mistake? Or was there something more to it? He didn't know yet, but his instincts told him this was no coincidence. Inside, the gala was nothing short of spectacular. The room shimmered with luxury. Golden chandeliers bathed the space in warm light, casting long, dramatic shadows on the polished marble floor. Tables were elegantly set with crystal glassware and fine china, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Everywhere he looked, there were faces of the nation's political elite. Senators, CEOs, lobbyists, and cultural influencers, all gathered in this one place to solidify their power and influence. Vance, as vice president, was no stranger to these environments, but tonight felt different. As he made his way through the crowd, a few polite nods and smiles followed him, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air that he couldn't ignore. Whispers seemed to follow him wherever he went, and he couldn't help but feel that many in the room were sizing him up, trying to figure out what had just happened at the entrance. He made his way to the bar, seeking some quiet amid the chaos of the room. His mind was racing. Was the doorman's rejection a personal slight, or had it been a misunderstanding? As he stood there, sipping his drink, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Michael Bennet, the well-known liberal TV host whose political commentary had earned him both admirers and detractors. Bennet was a frequent fixture on talk shows, known for his sharp critiques and biting humor. And tonight, he was mingling among the elites, as he always did. Vance had always known Bennet to be outspoken, and their paths had crossed many times over the years. But this time, there was something different in the air. Vance had a feeling that Bennet was more than just a casual observer tonight. He was here with a purpose, and that purpose wasn't to engage in friendly conversation. Bennet's eyes met Vance's across the room. There was no warmth in his gaze, just the calculated coldness of a man who knew how to play the game. Vance could see the wheels turning in Bennett's head as he walked toward him. A handshake was exchanged, but it felt more like a battle of wills than a gesture of camaraderie. Bennett's smile was tight, almost rehearsed, and his voice carried the distinct edge of sarcasm. "Mr. Vice President," Bennet said, his voice dripping with irony, "I'm surprised to see you here. After all, I would have thought a man of your stature would be given better treatment at the door." Vance's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his calm composure. Bennet was baiting him, trying to get a reaction, but Vance wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. He knew the power of restraint, and it was a tool he had mastered over the years. "Ah, Michael," Vance said, offering a faint smile. I see you're still trying to make a point. Let's just say I've learned that not everyone recognizes true power when they see it." Bennett chuckled, but there was no genuine warmth in it. "You know, JD," he said, leaning in slightly, "people are starting to wonder if you've really earned your place. Some are even questioning whether the system is working for anyone other than the wealthy and powerful. I mean, a man like you, someone who's been so outspoken about the divide in this country, should probably expect a little more from these exclusive gatherings." Vance's brow furrowed. He knew Bennett had a reputation for stirring controversy, but his words felt different tonight. There was an underlying suggestion that Vance was somehow part of the problem, that his own actions were in direct contrast to the message he had once preached about bridging the gap between the political elite and the everyday citizen. "I've always been honest about my position," Vance responded evenly. "I'm here because I believe in the power of change, not because I want to be part of the status quo. But don't mistake my presence for complacency." Bennett's eyes glinted with amusement, but there was an unmistakable challenge in his tone. "I'm sure you'd like to believe that, JD. But let's not kid ourselves. The people who run this event, they don't care about your vision. They care about their own power. And you're just another pawn in their game. They use people like you, manipulate you, and when they're done, they toss you aside." Vance felt a knot tighten in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. He knew Bennett was playing a dangerous game, trying to provoke him into a public confrontation. He wasn't about to fall for it. Before Vance could respond, Bennett took a step back and raised his glass. "Well, let's not get too bogged down in politics tonight. There's always time for another conversation, maybe when we're not surrounded by the people who make decisions for this country." Vance watched as Bennett disappeared back into the crowd, his words still echoing in Vance's mind. The insinuations about power, manipulation, and influence were hard to shake. Was Bennett right? Had Vance truly become part of the establishment he had once critiqued? The doubts began to swirl in his mind, but he refused to let them consume him. His resolve had always been rooted in his belief that change could come from within. He wasn't about to let a TV host's words change that. But as the night wore on, the seeds of doubt had been planted, and Vance couldn't ignore the growing feeling that his place in this world was far more precarious than he had ever imagined. As the gala continued, J.D. Vance found himself once again drifting through the crowd, his thoughts swirling. The conversations around him were filled with the usual political chatter, discussions of policy, influence, and upcoming elections. But tonight, for Vance, everything felt distant. He couldn't shake the conversation with Michael Bennett. The questions had hit harder than he had expected, and now he was left wondering whether his entire political career, his rise from the coal mines of Appalachia to the vice presidency, had been nothing more than a carefully curated narrative. Had he truly become the establishment figure Bennett accused him of being? The thought troubled him, but Vance was not one to back down. He had spent his life defying expectations, breaking through barriers, and standing up to those who told him he couldn't succeed. He had faced far worse challenges than this. The evening was drawing to a close, and Vance was preparing to leave the event when he was approached again, this time by a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of political power. Tall, poised, and impeccably dressed, she exuded an air of confidence that made everyone around her take notice. It was Elizabeth Dawson, a well-known political strategist with ties to some of the most influential figures in the country. She had always been an ally of Vance, and he respected her deeply. "You're still here," Elizabeth said, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "I was starting to wonder if you had left already. That exchange with Bennett seemed to have rattled you." Vance met her gaze, his expression carefully neutral. He had always respected Elizabeth's ability to cut straight to the heart of a matter. "It's nothing I can't handle," he replied, though his words lacked their usual conviction. "Bennett's just doing his job, trying to stir the pot, get a rise out of people." Elizabeth studied him for a moment, then spoke with a soft but firm tone. "I know you, J.D. You're not one to let someone else dictate your narrative. But you need to realize something. Bennett's words might have hit a little too close to home. He's right about one thing. This world, this game we're all playing, it's not what it seems. It's not about change. It's about power, and you need to decide whether you're going to be a part of it or stand apart from it." The weight of her words landed heavily on Vance's shoulders. He had spent years trying to bridge the divide between the establishment and the American people, but Elizabeth was reminding him of a harsh reality. He had climbed the political ladder, but at what cost? Was he becoming the very thing he had once stood against? Before he could respond, Elizabeth continued, "People like you, people with the platform, with the power, are rare. But that also makes you a target. Bennett and others like him won't hesitate to call you out, to question your motives. And if you don't respond, if you don't stand your ground, they'll label you as weak, as someone who just goes along to get along." Vance listened closely, absorbing her every word. It wasn't the first time he had heard such advice, but tonight it carried a different weight. He had been attacked before, but this felt different, more personal. Bennett's accusations had struck at the core of his identity, and now Vance found himself at a crossroads. Should he continue to play the game, or should he risk everything to show the world that he was still the man who believed in change, in progress, and in fighting for the people who had elected him? A long silence passed between them, but finally Vance spoke. "I've spent my life fighting against the odds. I won't let anyone redefine my journey. I've made mistakes, and I've learned from them. But I'll be damned if I let Bennett or anyone else dictate who I am." Elizabeth smiled slightly, a knowing look in her eyes. "That's the J.D. Vance I know. You'll have to face the consequences of your decisions, but you've always been willing to do that. Just remember, this isn't about the necklace or the event. It's about what you stand for and how you respond when they try to take you down." Vance nodded, his resolve solidifying. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He had faced adversity before, and he would face it again. But this time, it wouldn't be on anyone else's terms. He would control the narrative, not the media, not his critics. As he made his way toward the exit, Vance felt a sense of clarity. The night had been a test of his strength, his principles, and his belief in his own purpose. And as he walked out of the gala, he knew one thing for certain: he had passed the test. He was still J.D. Vance, the man who had risen from the ashes of Appalachia to become the vice president. And no one, not even Michael Bennett, could take that away from him. As the door to the event swung open, Vance stepped into the cool night air. The world outside was vast, filled with opportunities and challenges alike. But as he looked ahead, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the same determination and unwavering conviction that had brought him this far. The game wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun.